The council chamber fell silent when Ambassador Kale Morrow refused to kneel. 37 alien dignitaries, each draped in the bioluminescent silks of the Valith Dominion, stared at the lone human standing upright in a room where even planetary governors pressed their foreheads to the cold obsidian floor. The High Chamberlain's 4 eyes widened in what Kale had learned to recognize as barely restrained fury. "You dishonor the Empress with your spine, human," the Chamberlain hissed, his elongated fingers curling around his ceremonial staff. "All who enter the throne of resonance must submit." "I mean no dishonor," Kale said, keeping his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "But where I come from, we bow our heads in respect. We don't press our faces to the ground. I hope Her Imperial Radiance can accept the gesture my people consider their highest." He bowed, deeply, formally, the way his mother had taught him before the scattering, before Earth's first contact with the wider galaxy had turned humanity into refugees and laborers and footnotes in someone else's history. He held it for 3 seconds. Then he straightened. The murmurs that rippled through the chamber were not kind. Kale was not supposed to be here. No human was. The Valith Dominion had extended exactly 0 invitations to Earth's fledgling diplomatic corps for the Ascension Rites, a century-old ceremony where the Empress formally claimed her throne and selected potential consorts from allied species. Humanity wasn't allied with the Dominion. Humanity wasn't allied with anyone. They were tolerated, occasionally useful, mostly ignored. But 3 weeks ago, a Valith warship had dropped out of fold space directly above Geneva. Not a fleet. Not an invasion force. A single ship, elegant and terrifying, its hull singing with the harmonic frequencies the Valith used instead of communication arrays. The ship had broadcast one message, repeated in 14 languages. "We seek the human called Kale Morrow. The Empress requires his presence." The world had panicked. Kale had simply felt tired. He'd spent 6 years as a cultural attaché on minor Valith trade stations. The kind of posting nobody wanted because it meant living in cramped quarters, eating nutrient paste, and being politely reminded every day that your species was barely worth cataloging. He'd learned their language, studied their customs, mediated small disputes between human workers and Valith overseers. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that should have caught the attention of the most powerful woman in 4 star systems. Now he stood in her throne room, and the woman on the elevated dais was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Empress Sevain of House Valithari was not what human media had depicted. The propaganda images showed a towering, imperious figure with sharp features and cold, metallic skin. The reality was more complicated. She was tall, yes, nearly 7 feet, as all high-born Valith were, and her skin held that distinctive pale violet hue that shifted with emotional resonance. But her face was angular rather than sharp, and her silver eyes, bisected by vertical pupils, held something that looked less like imperial contempt and more like exhaustion. She had not spoken since he entered. The Chamberlain stepped forward again. "The human has offered insult, your radiance. Shall I have him? Leave us." The Empress's voice was low, textured with harmonics that resonated in Kale's sternum. Not loud. Not angry. Simply absolute. "Your radiance. The protocols." I said, "Leave us. All of you." The chamber emptied with a rustle of silk and the soft clicking of Valith footsteps. 37 dignitaries, a dozen guards, and one deeply offended Chamberlain filed out through the resonance gates. The doors sealed with a deep, musical hum. Kale and the Empress were alone. She stood from her throne, a living structure of crystallized bone that sang faintly with her movement, and descended the 7 steps to the main floor. Up close, she was even more striking. Not beautiful in the way humans understood beauty, but compelling in a way that made it difficult to look away. Her robes, deep indigo threaded with living light, pooled around her feet as she stopped 3 paces from him. "You learned our bow," she said. "I learned many things during my posting, yet you did not kneel." "No." "Why?" Kale met her gaze. Her pupils contracted slightly, a sign of focused attention. "Because I've spent 6 years kneeling in every way that matters. Working in stations where my name was never used, only my species designation. Eating after everyone else. Entering through service corridors. I did it because it was my job, and because I believed that small acts of patience could build something. But I promised myself that if I ever stood before someone with real power, I would stand. Not in defiance. Just as myself. The Empress studied him for a long moment. Then she did something that would have scandalized her court. She sat on the steps of her own throne, her imperial posture softening into something almost human. Do you know why you're here, Kale Morrow? I've been trying to figure that out since your ship parked over my planet. She invaded Earth looking for one human. It was me, she said. And the faintest trace of something like dark humor crossed her features. That is what your newscasters said, is it not? They thought I had come to conquer. Or to take a pet. Some of them said worse things. I imagine they did. She paused, and when she spoke again, the harmonics in her voice shifted to something lower, more private. 18 months ago, you resolved a labor dispute on Station Vareth 9. A Valith overseer had ordered human workers confined to their quarters without food for 30 hours as punishment for a production shortfall. Do you remember? I remember. You did not file a formal complaint, which would have been ignored. You did not start a protest, which would have resulted in the workers being expelled. Instead, you sat outside the overseer's office for 30 hours without food or water yourself, in full view of the station's monitoring systems. When asked what you were doing, you said, "If they don't eat, I don't eat. If that's the standard here, then it applies to everyone or it applies to no one." Yes. The Empress's silver eyes held his. The overseer relented within 6 hours. But the recording traveled further than you know. It reached the resonance court. It reached me. She leaned forward slightly. In the Valith Dominion, we have a concept called Velatharn. It has no precise translation in your language. The closest would be the weight a soul carries, the density of character. We believe it can be measured in moments of quiet endurance. And you measured mine from a security recording. I measured the silence of a man who chose hunger over helplessness, who refused to abandon people he was not obligated to protect. She stood again, and her full height was almost intimidating. Almost. I have been Empress for 11 days. In that time, I have received 412 formal proposals of consort alliance from noble houses across the Dominion. Every one of them offers military strength, genetic prestige, territorial advantage. Not one of them offers Velatharn. Kale felt the ground shift beneath his understanding. Your radiance, Sevain. When we are alone, you will use my name. That is not a request. Sevain. He tested the word carefully. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I am saying that I have invited you to the Ascension rites as a candidate. Not as a political maneuver. Not as an insult to my court. As a genuine candidate for consort. She paused. I am also saying that I will not force this. You may refuse. Your ship will return you to Earth with full diplomatic honors, and this will be recorded as a cultural exchange. No consequences. The silence between them was heavy with implications. Kale thought of Earth, still struggling, still ignored. He thought of his mother's grave on a planet that had moved on without her. He thought of 6 years of service corridors and species designations and meals eaten alone. I have questions, he said. I would be concerned if you did not. Why me? The real reason, not the poetic version. For the first time, something cracked in her composure. It was small, a tightening around her eyes, a shift in her skin's violet hue towards something darker, which he knew indicated pain or vulnerability. Because I am about to rule 4 star systems, and I have never once been looked at by someone who was not calculating my usefulness. Her voice dropped. You looked at those workers and saw people. I watched that recording 43 times, Kale. 43. And I thought, that is what it looks like when someone cares without a strategy. She turned away, and he saw her shoulders tighten. A Valith gesture of emotional containment. I am aware of how this sounds, she said quietly. An empress who sends a warship to collect a stranger because she watched a video and felt something. My court already thinks I am unfit. My chamberlain compiles evidence of my instability daily. Half the noble houses are waiting for me to fail so they can install a regent. She looked back at him over her shoulder. So you see, Kale Morrow, you are not the only one who has been kneeling. He should have been overwhelmed. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. The sharp, clean ache of recognition. Of seeing someone else's loneliness and understanding it from the inside. Then I'll stay, he said. Not because you're an empress. Because you asked. Something shifted in her silver eyes. Not gratitude. Valeth did not express gratitude the way humans did. Something closer to the first, tentative breath after holding one for too long. The rites begin at dawn, she said. You will face the other candidates. They will not be kind. I've survived unkindness before. Not like this. She moved toward the resonance gates, then stopped. Without turning, she said, My chamberlain will assign you quarters in the outer ring. It is far from the court and poorly furnished. He means it as an insult. I've slept in worse. I know. That is one of the many things about you that frightens my advisors. A pause. And one of the many things that does not frighten me. The gates opened, and she was gone, leaving Kale alone in a throne room that hummed with the memory of her voice. He stood there for a long time, breathing. The outer ring was, as promised, an insult. Kale's quarters consisted of a narrow room carved from unpolished resonance stone, which meant the walls absorbed sound rather than amplifying it, the Valeth equivalent of sensory deprivation. The bed was a raised platform without thermal regulation. The lighting was fixed at a dim amber that made reading difficult, and the only window faced an interior shaft that offered a view of nothing. He genuinely slept in worse. He unpacked his single bag, 2 changes of clothes, a data tablet loaded with Valeth legal codes, a photograph of his mother, and a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius that had traveled with him to every posting. He set the photograph on the platform beside the bed and sat down to wait for whatever came next. What came next was a visitor. The knock was precise, 3 sharp impacts, which in Valeth etiquette indicated a social call from someone of higher rank. Kale opened the door to find a Valeth woman who shared Sylvain's height but not her coloring. Where the Empress was pale violet, this woman was deep indigo, almost black, with eyes that glowed amber instead of silver. She wore the layered armor silk of a military officer, and her expression was the careful blankness of someone who had already decided to dislike him. Kale Morrow, she said. Not a question. That's me. I am Commander Thyra of House Valethari, the Empress's elder sister. I didn't know she had a sister. There are many things you do not know. That is why I am here. She stepped inside without being invited, a dominance gesture in Valeth culture, and surveyed the room with obvious disdain. The Chamberlain's work. Predictable. It's fine. It is not fine. It is a calculated humiliation, but your willingness to endure it is noted. She turned to face him fully, and her amber eyes were unnervingly direct. I do not approve of my sister's decision. I want you to understand that clearly. Understood. I do not believe a human is capable of meeting the demands of a consort bond. Your species is too fragile, too short-lived, and too emotionally volatile for the responsibilities involved. Also understood. And I believe that Sylvain is acting from isolation rather than wisdom. She has been alone too long, surrounded by predators disguised as suitors, and she has fixated on a recording of a man who showed basic decency and mistaken it for something rare. Kale let that sit for a moment. Then he said, Is it not rare? Thyra's eyes narrowed. What? Basic decency. In your court, among your nobles and your candidates. Is it not rare? The silence stretched. Thyra's skin shifted fractionally, a deepening of color that Kale recognized as the Valeth equivalent of being caught off guard. That is not the point, she said. With respect, Commander, I think that's exactly the point. Thyra studied him the way a soldier studies terrain, looking for weaknesses, angles of attack, hidden threats. Kale held still and let her look. He had nothing to hide and no strategy to conceal. The rites involve 3 trials, she said finally, her tone shifting from hostility to something more businesslike. The trial of resonance, the trial of sacrifice, and the trial of binding. The first tests compatibility. The second tests character. The third tests commitment. Got it. You will fail the first. Why? Because the trial of resonance requires harmonic alignment with Valeth biochemistry. It is measured by physical proximity. The closer a candidate stands to the Empress, the more their biological fields interact. Valeth candidates have spent decades training their resonance signatures. You are human. You have no resonance signature at all. Then why did Sylvain invite me? Something flickered in Thyra's expression, too fast to read. That is a question I have asked her 17 times. She has not answered it to my satisfaction. She moved toward the door. I came to warn you, Kale Morrow. Not out of kindness, but out of duty to my sister. If you embarrass her, if your presence here becomes a weapon her enemies can use against her, I will personally ensure your removal. And if I don't embarrass her? Thyra paused in the doorway. Then we will have a second conversation. And it will be very different from this one. She left without closing the door. Kale closed it himself, then sat back down on the platform and picked up his book. His hands, he noticed, were completely steady. The trial of resonance took place in the harmonic amphitheater, a vast circular space where every surface was tuned to amplify and measure biological frequencies. 300 spectators filled the ascending tiers, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. There were 9 candidates. 8 of them were Valith, tall, immaculate, their resonance signatures radiating from them like heat from a furnace. They stood in a crescent formation on the amphitheater floor, each one projecting confidence, genetic superiority, and political ambition in carefully calibrated proportions. Their names were ancient, their houses powerful, their bloodlines impeccable. And then there was Kale, standing at the end of the crescent like a punctuation mark that didn't belong in the sentence. The whispers from the spectators were not whispered quietly enough. A human? Is this a jest? The Empress has lost her. They smell, you know. Their biochemistry is completely. Kale kept his eyes forward. He'd learned long ago that the best response to being underestimated was patience. The Empress entered from a raised passage, and the amphitheater fell silent with a reverence that bordered on fear. Sylvain wore the resonance crown, a living circlet of crystallized bone that connected directly to her nervous system and amplified her harmonic field 100-fold. In this space, wearing that crown, she was essentially a living sensor array, capable of reading the biological and emotional signature of every being in the room. She descended to the amphitheater floor and began to walk. The trial was simple in concept. The Empress would approach each candidate, and the resonance crown would measure the harmonic compatibility between them. The results would be displayed on the crystalline matrices overhead, patterns of light and color that the Valith could read like sheet music. High compatibility produced complex, beautiful patterns. Low compatibility produced static. The first candidate, Lord Vareth of House Solen, produced a pattern that drew murmurs of appreciation. Rich, layered, symmetrical. The spectators nodded approvingly. The second candidate produced something similar. The third, slightly less impressive but still respectable. By the 7th candidate, a rhythm had established itself. This was a ceremony with a predictable outcome. One of these noble resonance-trained Valith would produce the highest compatibility, and the political negotiations would begin in earnest. Then Sylvain reached Kale. She stopped in front of him and he saw, up close, visible only to him, the faintest tremor in her hands. The crown of resonance hummed against her temples. The amphitheater held its breath. Kale felt nothing at first. Then a strange warmth, starting in his chest, spreading outward. Not unpleasant. Like standing in sunlight after a long winter. He looked up at the crystalline matrices. Static. Just as Thyra had predicted. No pattern. No harmony. Just the visual noise of 2 incompatible biological systems failing to communicate. The spectator's reaction was immediate and cruel. Laughter. Restrained, aristocratic, but unmistakable. Several of the Valith candidates exchanged glances that radiated satisfaction. The Chamberlain, seated in a position of honor, allowed himself a thin, triumphant smile. Kale kept his eyes on Sylvain, and Sylvain kept her eyes on him. What the spectators saw was a failed resonance test. What Kale saw was something else entirely. He saw the Empress's pupils dilate, a Valith sign of emotional intensity. He saw her skin shift toward a hue he didn't recognize, something between the violet of composure and the deep blue of vulnerability. He saw her fingers curl at her sides. "The Matrix does not lie," the Chamberlain announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of vindication. "The human candidate shows no resonance compatibility. Per the protocols of the rites he may be dismissed from. The Matrix measures harmonic alignment," Sylvain said, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "It does not measure Velitharn. The candidate remains." The silence that followed was not respectful. It was the silence of a court calculating the political cost of an empress who had just overruled her own ceremony. Kale said nothing. He simply inclined his head to her, The human Bao she had recognized the day before, and returned to his position in the crescent. Later, in the corridors outside the amphitheater, he found Thyra waiting for him. Her expression was unreadable, but her skin had shifted to a lighter shade than before, a color he associated with reassessment. "You did not react," she said. "React to what?" "The laughter. The humiliation. 300 Valeth mocking you, and you stood there, as if they were discussing the weather." Kale shrugged. "I told you. I've survived unkindness before. This is not a labor station, Kale Morrow. This is the resonance court. The unkindness here has teeth. So do I." He said it quietly, without aggression. A statement of fact. Thyra regarded him for another long moment. Then she did something he didn't expect. She reached out and adjusted the collar of his jacket, which had been slightly askew. It was a gesture he'd seen Valeth make with family members. Intimate. Corrective. Protective. "The trial of sacrifice is tomorrow," she said. "It will be worse." "Worse how?" "The other candidates will be given the opportunity to prove their worth by enduring something. The trial is different every year, tailored to expose weakness." She paused. "They will design yours to break you. Do you have any advice?" Thyra's amber eyes held his. "Do not break." She turned and walked away, and Kale noticed that she had left a small object on the windowsill beside him, a resonance stone, warm to the touch, tuned to a frequency that made the air around it feel calm. A gift. Small, deniable, but unmistakable. He pocketed it and went back to his room to read Marcus Aurelius. They designed his trial to break him. Thyra had been right about that. The trial of sacrifice was held in the Chamber of Echoes, a smaller, more intimate space where the resonant stone walls were tuned to amplify emotion rather than suppress it. Every heartbeat, every shift in breathing, every flash of fear or pain was broadcast to the assembled court like music. The other candidates went first. Lord Vareth was asked to renounce his family's territorial claim on the Solon Nebula, a significant political sacrifice. He did so with grace, and was applauded. Lady Cathara of House Maren was asked to sever her military command, temporarily, as proof of her willingness to place the Empress above personal ambition. She complied, though the tightness around her eyes suggested it cost her. Each sacrifice was meaningful but survivable. Political currency exchanged for political opportunity. The candidates understood the game. They'd been trained for it. Then the Chamberlain turned to Kale. "The human candidate," he said, and the way he said human made it sound like a medical condition, "presents a unique challenge for the trial of sacrifice. He holds no territory, commands no forces, and possesses no political standing that could be meaningfully surrendered." The Chamberlain paused for effect. "Therefore, the trial will be adapted." 2 guards entered the chamber carrying a resonance console, a device Kale recognized from his years on Valeth stations. It was a communication array, already connected to an active channel. "The human will be given the opportunity to contact Earth's diplomatic authority," the Chamberlain said. "He will then publicly renounce any claim to Earth's protection or citizenship. He will declare himself unaffiliated with his species. Alone. Stateless. This is his sacrifice. Not territory or power, but belonging." The chamber was silent. Several of the Valeth candidates looked uncomfortable. This was crueler than what they'd been asked to do, and some of them knew it. But none of them objected. Kale stared at the console. Earth's diplomatic authority, such as it was, had given him exactly nothing. No support, no funding, no recognition for 6 years of cultural bridge building. When the warship had appeared above Geneva, their first instinct had been to deny knowing him. When it became clear the Empress wanted him specifically, they'd suddenly become very interested in claiming credit. Renouncing them would cost him almost nothing in practical terms. But it would cost him everything in terms of what it meant. Earth was his home. Humanity was his people. His mother was buried in soil that he would never be able to return to if he did this. The Chamberlain knew exactly what he was asking. Not a political sacrifice, but an existential one. Sever yourself from who you are. Kale looked up and found Sevain watching him from the throne. Her face was controlled, imperial, revealing nothing. But her hands, gripping the arms of her throne, had turned her knuckles pale, even through her violet skin. She couldn't intervene. Not again. Not after overruling the resonance trial. The court was already questioning her judgment. If she protected him now, She would confirm every accusation of weakness and instability. Kale understood this. He understood it with the clarity of a man who had spent 6 years reading the unspoken rules of a culture not his own. He stepped forward to the console. "Before I do this," he said, his voice steady, "I want to say something. Not to the court. Not to the Chamberlain. To the Empress." The Chamberlain opened his mouth to object, but a sharp look from Thyra, seated in the military section, silenced him. Kale turned to face Sylvain directly. "You asked me to come here as a candidate, and I accepted. Not because I wanted power, and not because I was ordered to. I accepted because you showed me something I hadn't seen in 6 years of serving the Dominion. Honesty. You told me you were alone. You told me your court was full of predators. You asked instead of commanding." He paused. "What I'm about to do isn't a sacrifice for your throne. It's a choice I'm making for myself. Because the person I want to be would rather stand alone with someone honest and belong to a world that pretends he doesn't exist." He turned to the console, entered the frequency for Earth's diplomatic channel, and waited for the connection. The voice that answered was Administrator Chen, a bureaucrat Kale had met once briefly who had mispronounced his name. "This is Kale Morrow, Cultural Attaché. Registration number 730-1741, Bravo. I am formally renouncing my diplomatic affiliation with Earth's Interstellar Authority. I am relinquishing all citizenship protections, recall rights, and affiliated benefits. This is a voluntary declaration made under the observation of the Valeth Resonance Court." A pause. "Then, Morrow, you can't just... The political implications. We need to discuss. There's nothing to discuss. I'm making a choice. Goodbye, Administrator." He severed the connection. The Chamber of Echoes lived up to its name. The resonance walls broadcast what Kale was feeling to every person in the room. Not his words, not his thoughts, but his raw emotional signature. And what filled the chamber was not triumph or defiance or calculated strategy. It was grief. Clean, honest, wrenching grief. For a home that had never quite been home. For a mother he couldn't visit. For the boy who had once looked up at the stars and believed that reaching them would mean something. The grief of letting go. The Valeth candidates, trained from birth to suppress emotional displays, were visibly shaken. Several looked away. Lord Vareth's hands trembled at his sides. Because in Valeth culture, grief was sacred. It was the one emotion that could not be faked, could not be performed, could not be weaponized. The resonance walls stripped everything else away and left only truth. And the truth of Kale Morrow was that he was a man who had just lost everything he had left, and was still standing. The Chamberlain said nothing. For once, his thin face held no satisfaction. Sylvain rose from her throne. Protocol demanded that she remain seated during the trials. Protocol demanded that the Empress never show emotion during the rites. Protocol demanded 100 things that meant nothing in the face of what was filling the chamber. She descended the steps and crossed the floor to where Kale stood. The court held its breath. Lyra half rose from her seat, hand instinctively moving to her sidearm, not in threat, but in readiness to protect. Sylvain stopped in front of Kale. She was shaking. He could see it, the fine tremor along her jawline, the way her robes shifted with the motion. The resonance crown on her brow was broadcasting her own emotional signature now, and the crystalline matrices overhead erupted with patterns that no one in the chamber had ever seen, complex, layered, achingly beautiful. Not harmonic compatibility. Something else. Something the Valeth texts called Valeth Rin, resonance of the wounded. The frequency two damaged souls produce when they recognize each other. Sylvain reached out and took his hand. The contact was electric, not physically, but emotionally. Her fingers were longer than his, cooler, and they wrapped around his hand with a gentleness that was almost unbearable. "You are not alone," she said. Her voice was thick with harmonics he'd never heard before, raw, uncontrolled, stripped of imperial precision. "You are not stateless. You are not nothing." "I know," Kale said. His vision blurred, and he didn't fight it. "Neither are you." They stood there, hand in hand, in a room full of people who had never seen an empress weep and didn't know that humans could make them. The trial of binding was supposed to take place 3 days later. It did not. On the morning of the second day, Lord Vareth of House Solène formally withdrew his candidacy. His statement, delivered to the resonance court with uncharacteristic brevity, said simply, "I have seen Velitharn measured, and I cannot compete with it. I withdraw with honor." By midday, 2 more candidates had followed. By evening, 5 Earls. Lady Kethera of House Miren was the last to withdraw, and she did so in person, seeking out Kale in his outer ring quarters, with an expression that mixed reluctant respect with genuine bewilderment. "I have trained for 30 years to stand beside the Empress," she said, standing rigidly in his doorway. "I have mastered every resonance technique, every political subtlety, every martial discipline required of a consort." "I know," Kale said. "I've read your record. It's extraordinary." That surprised her. "You researched me. I researched all of you." It seemed respectful. Kethera stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly, a human gesture she had clearly picked up from somewhere. "What are you? Just a man who pays attention." "No," she said quietly. "You are considerably more than that. I am beginning to understand why she chose you." She straightened, pressed her fist to her shoulder in the Velith salute of acknowledgement between equals, and left. Kale stared at the empty doorway. Equals. She had saluted him as an equal. With all candidates withdrawn, the Chamberlain had no choice but to convene the binding council, a closed session of the Empress's closest advisors, including Thyra, where the final decision would be ratified or contested. It was the last institutional barrier between Sylvain's choice and its realization, and everyone understood that it would not be gentle. The council met in the resonance sanctum, a small, vaulted chamber deep within the palace where the walls were tuned to enforce truthfulness, a space where lies caused physical discomfort. Kale was not allowed inside. He waited in the corridor, sitting on a stone bench, reading Marcus Aurelius. He was on the passage about accepting what you cannot control when Thyra emerged. She looked different. The rigid military bearing was still there, but something had softened around her eyes. She sat beside him on the bench, another gesture of equality that he recognized and appreciated. "There was a vote," she said. "And? 7-3 against you." Kale closed his book. "I see." The Chamberlain argued that a human consort would destabilize the Dominion, that the allied houses would view it as an insult, that Sylvain was compromised by emotion and needed to be overruled for her own protection. Thyra paused. He made a compelling case. "He usually does." "He does." Thyra turned to look at him directly. Then I spoke. Kale waited. "I told the council that I had come to your quarters intending to find a reason to remove you. I told them about our conversation, how you challenged me, calmly, without posturing. I told them about the resonance trial, how you stood through mockery without flinching. I told them about the sacrifice, what it meant, what it cost you." She paused. "And I told them something I have not told anyone, including Sylvain." "What?" "That when I adjusted your collar that night in the corridor, I did it without thinking. My body recognized you as family before my mind did. And in 38 years of life, that has never happened to me." Kale felt the words settle into him like stones into water. "The vote was 7-3 against," Thyra continued. "But the Empress has final authority in matters of consort selection. She overruled the council." A pause. "And I changed my vote. For the record, making it 6-4. Still against, but no longer unanimous. That matters? In Velith politics, it matters enormously. Unanimous opposition can trigger a regency challenge. A divided council cannot." She stood. "You have my support, Kale Morrow. Provisional, conditional, and subject to revocation, if you hurt my sister. But you have it." He looked up at her. "Thank you, Thyra. Do not thank me. Prove me right." The binding ceremony was held at dawn, in the harmonic amphitheater where Kale had failed the resonance trial just days before. But the space had been transformed. The crystalline matrices overhead had been tuned to their highest sensitivity, and the resonance walls thrummed with a frequency that made the air feel thick with possibility. The court was full. 300 Velith, plus, for the first time in Dominion history, a small contingent of human observers, hastily dispatched from Earth's diplomatic corps. Administrator Chen was among them, looking profoundly uncomfortable in borrowed formal wear. Kale stood at the center of the amphitheater floor, wearing the simple dark suit he'd brought from Earth. He had been offered Velith ceremonial robes, and had declined. "I should stand here as what I am," he'd told Sylvain the night before, during a quiet conversation in her private garden, where the bioluminescent flowers had bloomed in colors he'd never seen. "And what are you?" she'd asked, and her voice had been soft, curious, stripped of all imperial weight. "Yours," he'd said, "if you'll have me. But yours as a human, not as an imitation of something I'm not." She had touched his face then. The first time she'd touched him since the Chamber of Echoes. Her fingertips had traced the line of his jaw, and her skin had shifted to a color he'd never seen in any Veilith reference text. Warm, luminous, the shade of sunrise through amethyst. "That color," he'd whispered. "What does it mean?" "It has no name," she'd said. "It has never happened before." Now she descended from the throne passage in her binding robes, white silk that shifted with internal light, the resonance crown replaced by a simpler circlet that left her face unguarded, visible, vulnerable. She looked, Cale thought, like someone who had finally decided to stop performing. The binding ritual was ancient, and Cale had studied it exhaustively. The consort knelt. This time, he would kneel, because this was not submission but offering, and the Empress placed her hands on either side of his face. The resonance field between them would be broadcast to the entire amphitheater, and the court would witness, for better or worse, the truth of what existed between an Empress and the impossible man she had chosen. Cale knelt. Sevain placed her hands against his skin, and the amphitheater erupted. Not with the elegant, symmetrical patterns of traditional resonance. Not with the static of incompatibility. Something entirely new, wild, asymmetric, beautiful, like two different pieces of music finding a shared rhythm they'd never been written for. The crystalline matrices blazed with colors the Veilith had no names for, patterns that their resonance scholars would study for decades. Cale felt it. Not as sound or vibration, but as presence, Sevain's inner landscape opening to him, raw and unfiltered. He felt her loneliness, vast as space, her fear, sharp as a blade, her hope, fragile as glass. And beneath all of it, an aching, ferocious will to choose something real over something safe. He let her feel him in return. His grief, his stubbornness, his mother's laugh, half forgotten. The way he'd looked at the stars as a child and felt both tiny and infinite. The way he'd sat outside that overseer's office, hungry and cold, knowing it wouldn't change anything and doing it anyway because it was right. The chamber was weeping. 300 Veilith, a species that considered emotional display a weakness, were openly weeping. Thyra was not weeping. She was standing at rigid attention in the military section, her hand pressed to her heart in a salute that was usually reserved for fallen soldiers, a gesture of honor so profound that the officers around her stared in disbelief. Sevain spoke the binding words, ancient, formal, resonant with centuries of tradition. But when she reached the final phrase, she deviated from the script. "Instead of the traditional, I claim this consort for the Dominion," she said. "I choose this man. Not for the Dominion. Not for the throne. For myself. Let the record show that the Empress of the Veilith chose freely, and chose well." Cale rose to his feet and took her hands. Her fingers trembled in his, and he held them steady, not with strength, but with patience. "And let the record show," he said, his voice carrying through the amphitheater with a clarity that surprised even him, "that the man she chose will spend every day earning it." He kissed her. It was not a Veilith gesture. They did not kiss. It was entirely, unmistakably human. Soft, deliberate, a press of his lips to hers that carried every unspoken thing between them. "I see you. I choose you back. You are not alone anymore." Sevain went still. Then her hands released his and moved to his shoulders, pulling him closer, and the resonance field around them detonated into something the matrices couldn't contain. Light spilling from the crystalline arrays, flooding the amphitheater in A's. Colors that had no names in any language. When they parted, the chamber was silent. Then Thyra began to clap. It was a human gesture she had never used before, and the sound of it, sharp, rhythmic, deliberate, broke the silence like a stone through glass. One by one the court followed. Not the polished, ritualistic approval of Veilith tradition, but something rawer, more honest. 300 people acknowledging that they had witnessed something they did not fully understand but could not deny. The Chamberlain did not clap, but he bowed. And for a Veilith of his rank, that was perhaps more meaningful. Sylvain leaned close to Kale's ear, and her breath was warm against his skin. You bowed on the first day, she murmured. You knelt today. My advisors will say you've learned submission. And what will you say? Her hand found his again, and her skin shifted once more to that impossible unnamed color, the hue of something the universe had never produced before because it never had reason to. I will say that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is choose where to place their strength. She pulled back and looked at him with silver eyes that held, for the first time since he'd known her, no trace of loneliness. Welcome home, Kale. He squeezed her hand. I was home the moment you asked. Around them, the amphitheater hummed with a resonance that scholars would later describe as unprecedented. Two frequencies that should have been incompatible, producing a harmony that was entirely new. Outside, in the deep black between stars, Earth turned slowly on its axis, and the people there would learn in time that one of their own had not been taken from them. He had found them a place at the table, and he had done it not with weapons or wealth or political cunning, but with the only thing that had ever truly mattered, the stubborn, irrational, magnificently human refusal to stop caring.
¿Quién es usted? Pues sí me veo con un pendejo. De por sí me veo con un pendejo, imagínate con estas mamadas.
Grupo, se fue la luz. ¡Están reventando
Los bombillos se están reventando, están quemando.
Yo creo que si vas a estar lo que dure toda la convención, tenés que estar cómodo y si te resultan molestas no van a ir bien.
Sí, es el pedo. Y luego vas a estar batallando para guardarlas y la chingada. ¿Quién es usted?
Nunca en México sin hambre, Claudia. Mira este hijo de perra.
Déjame en paz, por favor. Déjame disfrutar mis pendejadas que ando diciendo por abrir el pinche hocico. Mira, aquí estaba la pinche montura, güey, pendejo, yo busque y búsquela.
Chatcito, recuerden tener su canje de sonidos curiosos de anime listos para sorprender a los otakus.
¿Quién es usted? ¿Qué canción quieren escuchar, güey, para el este? Ah, ¿qué onda? Es que yo apenas te vi, güey. ¿Qué pedo, pa? Pero ahorita literalmente, güey, vamos a tomar un chingo de fotos con los cosplays. Me vale verga, güey.
¿Qué onda, mamacita? La de arigato pa' que nos bailes.
¿Por cuál es esa, güey?
Ya ponga el anime más cringe que se pueda.
Ah, pues pásame la canción, güey, que está en Spotify.
El opening.
Verga, ¿cómo era? Papure, 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 papure. Ay, no, ay, no, ay, no, ay, no. ¿Cómo era así, güey? Así.
J, 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 J.
Ay, no, puta madre, güey. Cambia esta pinche chingadera de canción. Esa está mejor. El papure, papure, papure. Lo bueno que no tengo una cámara aquí enfrente, güey. No mames, güey. Donación para un souvenir. No mames, güey. Pinches souvenirs van a estar bien caros, güey.
¿Cómo siente el nudo de piña mi apa? ¿Quién será el primer suertudo que te verá dando los servicios de Uber?
¿Cómo? Verga, ni me digas, güey. Con la camioneta. Es que estoy viendo el stream, güey. Quiero ver si se ve bien.
A ver con las orejitas. Ahora tú cobrarás los 1500. No se te olvide enfocar a las chichonas.
Ah, no, pues ya ustedes van a ver, güey. Verga, ¿para qué me pongo estas mamadas? Será. Papure, 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 papure. Verga, se me cayeron. Papure, papure. ¡Ey! Espérate, tenemos que pagar, güey. Espérate. Ya sé, cacho. Espérate. There you go.
Kawaii.
Espérame. Alright, thank you, man. You too.
Pero al menos al primero no le cambies la cámara para ver la reacción cuando entre al carro V.
No, pero
Va
eso
que
te
se
falta.
muere de Wiwencha XD.
Ah, yes, please. No mames, pues. Imagínate tú, güey. Thank you. Appreciate it. ¿Por qué se me queda viendo tan feo, señorita? Oye, no me dio tenedor. Ah, no, no me dio popote.
Oh my god, esto va a ser épico, papus.
No me dio popote, güey. Esto va a ser épico, papus. Me veo divina. Espera, a ver si dejo. Era al revés aquí, así. Así. Supone que así van, creo. No sé. Hasta la verga, carnal. Hasta la verga, pinche estorboso.
Dijo que pases por el popote detrás del mostrador, pero que te agaches. Chucha.
Espérame. Papure.
Te voy con cara de que rico se ve ese hombre.
Y luego estas son las otras. Estas ya están más desgastadas, güey. Creo que la mejor opción va a ser las blanquitas. Quítate a la verga. Ahí está. Ajá. Verga, siento que ese contador Ibor va a subir bien culero, No sé
Las
por qué.
cascabelosas están más bonitas.
Sí, es que estas están más, ya están más gastadas. Ya,
Ayer
güey.
estabas elegante y hoy te ves divino.
Me veo divino.
Di miau.
Miau. Arigato, ¿cómo era? Arigato gozaimasu. Ubu. Bueno, me dieron popote, güey. Pinche mamada, güey.
Jajajajaja, eres el mejor, Jera. Me debes como 2 papures más, pero te perdono porque ayer me compraste heladito. Esas las tienes caídas. Estoy en la chamba, deja que vaya al baño para hacer la manualidad. Se te ven mejor esas. Gerardo kun todo kawaii desu ne. Nian desu.
Nian de eso. Ya sí tengo un desmadre en el carro, güey. Pero, tengo buena hamburguesa. Las papas, digo.
Apa cuando vaya corriendo las canicas rebotan con libertad. Pero cuando vaya al baño irá el de niñas o de varones mi apa.
Pues tú qué cuál, güey. Lo que me da miedo es que se moje el vestido, güey. Ay, güey, mami, güey. ¿Qué verga se escucha? Ah, no lentes.
Dime Jaiba senpai.
Ah, la verdad, espérame. No, que me como la papa. ¿Cómo era? Jaiba... ¿Cómo era? Se me olvidó, güey. ¿Cómo era esa mamada? Ya me acuerdo. Ya me curasai.
Ya me te kudasai, bro.
Esa mamada, eso. Ya me te curasai, güey. ¿Les dejo ese pop o se los cambio, güey? ¿Cómo ven?
Pide bits a cambio de decir cochinadas japos.
Va.